Okay, welcome everyone to our workshop. And today's topic is, as you can see on the screen, it's the Startup Legal Survival Guide. And what we'll discuss within the next 40 minutes is that we will highlight the challenges, like the most frequent challenges that every startup faces on its path to success. And you will illustrate those challenges with cases based on our daily practice. So my name is Michael. This is my dear colleague Alice. We are both VC lawyers at a large law firm, large Swiss law firm. And well, the VC it's called, and it operates a startup desk. Alice will tell you a bit more about the startup desks in a second. But first, a short overview about today's short workshop. First, a quick introduction of the Valder Startup Desk, and then we will really walk you through the different phases of the early phases of a venture. So first, we'll look at the pre-incorporation phase, so very early stage, and then we will some challenges that you might encounter there highlight from a general standpoint. And for every general standpoint here, we also brought a case study with us just to illustrate how these challenges really could emerge so that you can learn from them and avoid the mistakes. The same we will do also for point 3 and 4. So we kind of cover the whole spectrum, as I think that some of the people in this room are already a bit later stage and others might be a bit earlier stage. So very important to mention here from our side is that by no means we want to kind of discourage you from taking risks. But what we want to do is share our experience so that you can anticipate and avoid potential conflicts and potential challenges and potential mistakes, and so save yourself money and gray hair and heart attacks and all that comes with it. So with this, I can then hand over to my colleague Alice, who will tell you a few words about the Valder Startup Desk.
Yes, also hello, warm welcome from my side. I'm Alice, also member of a lawyer at Valder, same like Michael. Let me introduce you to the Valder Startup Desk. So just so you know, Valder is a full-service law firm. We're one of the biggest ones in Switzerland. And this is very helpful because our startup desk then comprises the knowledge from all legal areas, right, which are relevant for startups. And since we are located in all language regions in Switzerland, we also we have offices in all bigger cities in Switzerland and would cover all language regions thereby, which is good if you also, you need contacts with local authorities and tax authorities. It's always good to have someone nearby. I think the numbers speak a bit for themselves. As you can see, we are about 30 legal and tax experts who dedicate part of their time or most of their time to advise startups in all matters which are relevant for a startup. And here also, as you can see, over the last 3 years, we've conducted roughly over 150 financing rounds. So I think we are really, we know what market standard is, and we also are happy to really advise startups on it. We really like that. But also, if it's not just a financing round, even if you have other smaller things like want to have something checked or, employee incentive plans, this is all something we are happy to advise on. Yes, here, I think one of the most important things for you to consider is that you have to contact us early on. Don't do it when it's already too late and you've already signed something, especially when you're dealing with investors. Be careful. So we are interested in long-term relationships with you. Especially at the beginning, we are, you can always contact us on an informal basis, and we're really happy to provide you with advice. You just let us know. As I said, we're interested in long-term relationship building, and so, we will find each other, and this helps us obviously also to define the needs and the budget, because we are aware that startups may not have necessarily the funds required, to get legal advice. But since we are so big, this is something we can really easily provide and help you with. Exactly. And here also a bit information about ourselves, that our prices are really competitive also because, first of all, we have a huge range of templates and we work based on that. And obviously, we will customize them, but that makes us efficient. We also have implemented AI tools, which are also really helpful to make it even faster. And yeah, and obviously, we're happy to grant discounts, just for you as a basis information. And I think here some clients, long-term partnerships we have built, also when they were still quite small. And as you can see, and they're still with us. And so we are really interested in long-term partnerships. And this is a bit of our track record, just to give you a bit of an idea. Yeah, I think I'll hand over back to Michael.
Yes, thank you. So finally, the boring part is over. And we now come to the introduction of our today's case. Do you want to?
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
Sorry.
Okay, that's me again. So we will, based on actual examples we had, obviously we changed the names and everything, we will give you some real-life examples we had and discuss possible solutions and pitfalls and things, how you can best avoid them. And these are always the protagonists of each story. So let me give you a quick introduction about Susan. She is the tech nerd. Paul, the finance professional, and Mary, the marketing monster. And in different constellations, they have to do with each other in these scenarios. So let's first start with the case. And please interrupt if you have any cases or any questions.
Maybe a slide is missing, but that is not relevant because I can. Here it is.
I think we should first make some...
some general kind of remarks. As we mentioned, for every step, we do first some general remarks, do's and don'ts and challenges, and then illustrate those with a case study. So sorry for the confusion. I hope you are awake now. And so in the pre-incorporation phase, is there someone in the room, I imagine, who has not yet incorporated legal entities? So quite a few, so great. We brought with us today 2 points where we, from our experience, believe they're very relevant that you should consider taking care of and address in this early phase. So the first point and the first challenge is that there are potential misunderstanding when collaborating in the founder team, within the founder team, and also with potential advisors or whoever then kind of joins this team. Because very early stage, as you know better than me, it's quite a loose organization. You never know. You are building a startup, but you never know exactly who is in the team, who will be in the team for the long term, who is just contracted, who is contributing. Simple example is that you are telling your friends, your colleagues, your peers that you're building a startup and that you want to kind of have a website, and your colleague just tells you, I know someone who's really good at this and does this also in the free time, and they will say, there's a link, and they start building a website and they send you something and say, that's nice, I like it, can you change this and that? But no one actually talks about in this phase about who contributes what, and even more important, what they receive in return. So our first challenge is, what are the rules? Who works? How much? Is someone working only part-time? Is someone often on vacation? Is someone working day and night within the founder teams? And how is the relationship between the team and potential advisors? So this is the first challenge that Alice's case will then address, and we will illustrate this challenge with this case. And the second is the IP rights. So per definition, in the pre-incorporation phase, there is no separate legal entity where you can register the IP rights on, right? So you are an organization of people who are building a startup, but there is no company yet, no startup company where this IP rights could be registered. So, but you has attended a lot of workshops and studies, so you know that you have to register them very early as possible. So whenever you come up with a nice, catchy name or a name, how do you want to call your company or your product? So you really want to kind of secure this IP early. let's take a very, very simple example so that everyone, also us, understands domain name. So to register a domain name, you have to enter a person who is then the owner of this domain name, right? In the founder team, someone will have to do this. So a individual person will register the domain on his or her name. It goes on and on and on, and one day there will be a startup that is incorporated. This startup is then not the owner of this domain name. But this startup is the place where the funding will go in. This startup is the place where the whole value will be in. So you should think about where to register your IP rights. And you see it here at the very bottom line. Do not register IP rights in the name of individuals without contract. And what we mean by that, we will illustrate on other cases. It's very simple. I can give you one takeaway. Just deal with it in any way. Just address the issue. So this is something that these 2 points we would like you to take away from today in the pre-incorporation phase.
Yeah. Okay. So I already introduced the actors of these cases that we're going to address now. But let's first look at case number 1. It's called Nerd Meets Opportunist. So here we have Susan. Susan has a great business idea. And she already started producing some code, right? She then shares her business idea with Mary. Mary thinks, oh, this is really good. And they start working together to develop business concepts. And they dedicate all of their time to do so. Later on, 1 year, 2 years down the road, I don't remember exactly how long it was, they want to incorporate. Susan then says, well, let's do 70-30 because after all, I came up with the idea, I produced the code, and you were more like from the business side involved. Mary disagrees. She thinks that she should have a claim of 50-50 because after all, she also dedicated full time to make everything fly. And they really cannot find an agreement. And what they do is Mary ultimately joins the department, the marketing department, I think, of a big corporate it was. Susan then thinks, well, okay, I don't need her. Then I incorporate by myself. So, and my question for you is now, can Susan do that? And I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. Any ideas? Yep.
Well, she wouldn't be able to use any material that Mary has produced, I would assume, without her agreement. But other than
Okay.
that, I would say maybe, yes.
Okay, you think she could use the code and everything, and
She was the one that wrote it, yes, I think.
yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
So Mary is the marketing lady that left.
Yeah.
Right? But was there any kind of also informal agreement between them?
Formal agreement.
Informal, like
Yeah, that's the question now. I mean, there's definitely nothing in writing, and it's a good.
oral agreement is an agreement. So
Great point.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, but then the question is also how you can prove it, if it's just an oral agreement. And before court, it's hard to make a case based on what has been said orally, because ultimately you have word against word, right? But the point here is, have you heard of simple partnerships? Simple partnerships are in Switzerland under Swiss law is when 2 or more persons together with joint efforts work towards a common goal. And under Swiss law, you don't need to have a written agreement by that. So it could be that they constitute a simple partnership. And what does that mean? I mean, to prove the case whether they're a simple partnership or not, you could arguably say they are, right? You have to define that based on documentation. You could, but simple partnership, when you, for instance, work jointly together, full time, comprehensively with a common goal, and you could say that they may have done that because their common goal was this business idea they developed together, right? And everyone is contributing with what they can to it. And the thing is, when you have a simple partnership, then the problem is that everyone everything belongs to them jointly. Everyone has a joint right for whatever belongs to the partnership. And what is also very important, you have a non-compete provision under Swiss law. So this means that if Susan and Mary constituted a simple partnership, you cannot then just Susan by herself incorporate, because that would be a violation of the non-compete provision. So there you may have a bit of a problem. And then also a bit with the IP, you don't know whether Susan has, brought the IP into partnership, whether it's still with her, whether she has leased it. These are all things which then would also be have to, looked at carefully. And the thing is here, you can terminate a simple partnership, that's possible, and by default it's with 6 months notice. But it doesn't really solve the case, right, because you created something. And when the company is not doing well, it's not maybe an issue and Mary was not interested, but what happens after 5 years, and then Mary comes and says, well, there's a partnership, I have also a claim for shares, yes?
It's a great use case, by the way. What about if Susan uses the code and under a new name and starts with herself and by herself?
Yeah, that's exactly that. That's exactly the problem. Can she do that, or did it belong to the partnership, the IP? And there you have a problem. But even if you can do that, you have some kind of uncertainty right here in this whole scenario. And the bottom line here of this case is that investors don't like that, and maybe they are not interested to invest in Susan's case if they have some unresolved, situation with Mary, because she may come back, and they really don't like that. And this is the wrap up of what we discussed. And so the thing is, it's not about solving the case here. It's really just to be clear that you have to be certain, as Michael already mentioned at the beginning. The idea is not to speak, with others to validate your business idea. Obviously, everyone needs to do that to have a challenge, but you always have to be clear on the proposed partnership and document it. So they should have just maybe put something in writing, to say who should get what later when they would incorporate. Yeah?
Okay. Let's say that they don't find an agreement on the sharing, and then they wouldn't proceed with incorporation. What would be a possible solution to mitigate this risk? Like an upfront agreement stating, could you state that's not a simple partnership?
Yeah.
Before we start collaborating, like with an NDA?
Yeah. That's a good point. You can maybe have something in writing saying you dissolve. In case it should have been a partnership, you dissolve it, and then no one has any claim, or that person has no claim for whatever. That's just clear.
Of course, best would have been to find an agreement upfront.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also not about to scare you, right? It's not with everyone. If you are planning on incorporating and you have someone providing a service, it's not that you have to be scared that whoever provides the service then has a claim for shares. This is what really goes further, right? Because that person was fully involved. And yeah, so don't be silent and don't postpone this difficult negotiation, because it's really sad, because ultimately the mission got aborted for Susan and she had to do something new. Yeah.
Fantastic. I mean, horrible story, but at the end of the day, what we can take away from Alice's great presentation here is that in this case, right, Mary and called you, Alice. No, Susan called you. Susan was your client, and what she faced was a letter of Mary's lawyer. So Mary's lawyer wrote a letter to Susan's lawyer claiming that that Susan cannot incorporate because she contributed to it. And this is the stuff that Alice mentioned, is identified by investors. Before they invest, they look for potential dispute. So you want to avoid such scenarios by, as Andrea mentioned here, just entering into a simple agreement among you in the pre-incorporation phase, as we kind of showed in the general points. Put something in writing in any form. Does not have to be a kind of a proper founder agreement. Andrea mentioned an NDA. You can do this, but you can also draw up a simple founders agreement.
Exactly. You had a question?
I'm still wondering, how was this dissolved then? Could Susan just keep the code under a new umbrella, under a new name, new company, and since it was in such an early stage?
This actually how it was in practice was it was the fact that Alice laid out the risks to Susan, because Mary's lawyer wrote, "We are a simple partnership for this and this and this reason." And then we looked into documentation, emails, WhatsApp, wherever. Is there something that she, could use for her claim that it's a 50-50 split? And then we evaluated what we had as material, and we laid out to Susan, you can now decide this is the risk that she is maybe right and she will win the case in front of courts. And at the end of the day, there was a certain risk kind of percentage, and Susan decided not to take the risk. But your question, can she do it anyways? Yes, of course you can. Yes, of course you can go on and incorporate and use your own code and whatever. And, Mary would have to make the claim, which is never easy. Claimant position is never easy in Switzerland. Yes, so pre-incorporation phase, 2 takeaway. Structure your relationships among you, but also with involved people. And 2, secure IP rights early, but think about already where they will have to be transferred, and is this person who registered the IP rights obligated to transfer these IP rights later? Okay, questions? If not, we would go to incorporation. Okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, it's a bit late already. Huh? Yes, so anyone already incorporated? Yes, one. Good. To AG or GmbH, a corporation or limited liability company? Limited. Why?
Because it was like a lower cost for us.
Okay, good. Why did you incorporate?
Because we had thought that revenue would come soon. And that was the first reason, and the second one was also to get more trust from our possible clients.
Nice point. Good point.
Oh yeah, no. So to receive some of the initial pre-seed funding,
Okay.
we had to have an entity existing.
Nice. So combined, it's really it's about trust. But for you guys, it's also about limiting liability risks, of course. So the challenge in an incorporation setup is to when do I have to incorporate, and the why you answered already. When we always say, it depends. The latest point is, as you know, with lawyers, lawyers, right? It depends, but it's the moment where you start to collaborate with potential business partners. You want to limit your liability, and you want to make sure that contracting party is a separate legal entity where your liability is limited. Also the trust element that you mentioned. A lot of partners, they are simply not willing to cooperate with the loose founder team. Huh? Okay. Choice of legal form, we already discussed. You mentioned you have not enough funds, so you went for the LLC, you went for the AG or LLC? Limited liability company or corporation, AG or GmbH?
I'm not really sure what it's called here.
Okay.
But in South Africa, it's
okay.
PTY.
It's okay. I don't know nothing about it. But, the thing is, why is this relevant? A lot of founder teams are struggling with this, decision at the end of the day. And from our experience, Alice, you agree that we never met an investor who liked the fact that you were a GmbH, limited liability company. Why? Several reasons. Most obvious ones is with a GmbH, you're smiling, but because you are converting now, right, into an AG. And why? It's public knowledge who is the investor. So you can look up in a register who is the shareholder of those companies. Investors often do not really like that is this public knowledge. Second, and same important reason, is that several elements of a capital measures are not possible to implement with GmbH. Most famously, the conditional capital so that you give out convertible loans or options or whatever that would automatically convert into equity are often underlined with a certain type of capital so that this grants additional security to investors. And this is not possible to implement with a limited liability company. And also, as our colleague can describe to the audience, is a conversion hard to do? Sorry?
It depends. We try to put in new products as well. So we restructure also with new people on board. So yes and no. On paper, technically yes, but to find the common agreements and also shareholding.
Yeah. So from our perspective, it's not easy to do. I mean, it's easy to do, but it's costs involved and you have to do it. So if it's anyhow possible to go straight for the AG, it's 50K, you should do it. That's our simple advice. 50K, and then the other 50K you are liable to pay them in, but you can do it later. Good. Then choice of shareholders. Challenge, who should be a shareholder? This is a challenge in the incorporation phase. Very intuitive, you would say, of course, the founder team, right? But then my question is, who is the founder team? And how are the percentages divided? Often, and we see it in the case, there are people that in the last minute come, I can incorporate as well. You know, I'm there from the start. Choose smart money. Choose money that helps you build the startup. Decide which money you want, which investor you want on board. Avoid, if possible, a large shareholder base. From our experience, Alice, you did already pooling and stuff of a large amount of shareholders. It's cumbersome because everyone can vote and they can discuss in your startup if they have a share. So you should really be careful that there's not a lot of people involved, if possible, at the beginning. And if you involve them, you should pool them together so that you kind of have a control over. All this crowdfunding stuff is it's really hard. Okay, then shareholders documentation. You heard about shareholders agreement. This is a absolute key document that you have to have once you have incorporated. So this is not a real challenge because the simple advice is the day you incorporated, you have a shareholders agreement. If not, don't cry if there's trouble. Huh? Okay, and employment documentation, ESOP, you will probably discuss later. Huh? If there's still time. So I'll hurry up. Case 2, Nerd Meet Wolf. The Finance Pro actually involves also an experience from the startup days. So it's about 2 people in our situation here. It's Susan and Mary. They worked at the venture arm of a large and well-known retailer, a little hint with the orange logo. And this venture arm got kind of terminated due to restructuring of this retailer. So they changed strategy and the venture arm was terminated. So what they did is incorporated a company. They thought, let's use the know-how, let's incorporate together. 50-50, we have the know-how, we have the network. Okay. They went to the startup days 2 years ago and they met Paul. And Paul is an ex-McKinsey consultant who exited 2 startups and told them, you know, guys, I can help you with the finance and I can really help you with my network and I can really show the investors the hockey stick. You know, you don't know how to do this. I can do slides that you never saw before and stuff. Good. What they did, they were very impressed, of course, also of this whole story. And what they did is they tell him, what you want in return, because we're not able to pay like McKinsey salaries, of course. And he told them, no, it's okay. I don't charge a lot. Just give me 30% of the equity when you incorporate. And so they came to me and we had advised them. And they told me, you know, kind of this deal. And I told them, please consider if this is a good deal. I mean, at the end of the day, you're the decision makers. I'm helping you with making the decisions, but this is a lot, right? Okay, day of incorporation comes, and I told them, please send them the draft shareholders agreement just to test his reactions, because in there, of course, all the provisions that will protect the team, and let's see how he would react. I never heard back, and then day of incorporation come, and they incorporated with the split that you see on the slides. At the end of the day, he got 20%, right? So week 2 later, 2 months down the road, they call me and say, hey, Michael, Paul is not reachable. He's not working. He's not contributing. He never shared. He opened maybe one door a bit, but nothing else, right? And what can we do? Okay, we don't want him in our team anymore because he's not earning the shares as we do. We work day and night, and they actually really did and still do. The fact that he never signed the shareholders agreement, right? So because just he refused. He said, nah, I don't need this and stuff. And I say, okay, let's ask him friendly, right? So what do you want? Just leave. What do you want? Just give back the shares. He told me, yeah, leave. But you have to give me a horrible amount of money plus 250K advisory salary. And for the shares, it was a valuation that he calculated based with some method, with a kind of EBIT multiple that I never heard before in this industry. And he told me its level was like 2 million and 250K advisory fees. And they called me and said, Michael, this is not acceptable. What can we do? I said, yeah, what can we do? Anyone?
There is no shareholder
No.
agreement.
Yeah, they entered, but not Paul. He did not sign.
But why got the shadow incorporation if you didn't sign the
That's good. You don't need to be in this course. You understood everything. Yeah, you never let someone subscribe for shares unless he signed the shareholders agreement. Never. You just never do it. Not even your best friend. And then if they, they say, yeah, no, you can trust me. You say, no, let's call Alice and Michael, and they tell you the story. Yeah. So takeaway is very simple. I mean, you can do nothing else but negotiating a price. Nothing else. And you have to invite him for the shareholder meeting. He can vote. Here, of course, with 20%, he cannot do a lot of harm because he cannot vote because you have the controlling majority. But still, he could basically go out and sell the shares to a competitor, worst case. There are some corporate law restrictions to do this, and the board has some control. But the real thing that we would need here is the right to take away his shares if he did not earn the shares. And we don't have it yet.
So doesn't the shareholder agreement has some protection for the shares that
Yeah.
he wouldn't have, and that could be used to remove the share,
Yeah.
like over dilution?
Absolutely. Let's move to the next slide, but he did not sign.
Yeah. Yeah, but if he didn't sign, maybe he doesn't have any protection as well, right? So maybe you can dilute his shares a lot, for example.
Very good point. Can we dilute him? There's mandatory provisions in corporate law that you cannot dilute the shareholder unless you grant him the right to participate, and he did not make use of the right. Yeah. This is one of the most important laws for everyone who holds shares, right? Preemptive subscription right. Okay, you have the slides online. You can see, so I will skip. I mean, it's simple. We mentioned everything. Most importantly, take warning serious. Think about who you will let participate and let them subscribe for the shareholders agreement. This is still alive. They mentioned to negotiate a good price, but they had to pay for the shares. But they. Do you want to do this?
Nee, dat was nog doen.
We don't have time.
Ja, dan mag je dan ergens.
Mag je eens op?
Nee,
Okay, I will do one more, and then we go to ESOP, and then we terminate. Okay, shareholders agreement. You mentioned it, right? All the provisions, the very important provisions, is only that we are still in the phase challenge now after incorporation. And after or at incorporation is a shareholders agreement. And there are, and we only focus now on this section, call options here. There are in this agreement the rights to take away some other shareholders' shares, to force him to sell for a price that you in advance agree. And you then, depending on the reason for this person, kind of what he did, there's a different price. So if someone breached the contract, breaches the law, does a criminal act, it's a low value. If someone dies, it's the normal value, it's the market value. But you decide, right, what you agree. And most famously, the good and bad leaver provisions are here as well. Because what they say is that you have to earn your shares. So if you earn the shares in a certain amount of period of time, and within this period, if you leave for a reason that is not for cause, we can take away the shares for a very low amount. But those shares that you earned, we take them away, but we pay the fair market value. Yeah.
Can you do the opposite? I mean, instead of having a call option where you take back the share, that you don't give the share, you reserve 20% of the store, they're not assigned to you, they're reserved, and then if you meet certain criteria, then they're transferred.
Yes, you could stay here and give the presentation. At the end of the day, it's exactly why it's not done this way. It's for tax reasons. You want to own the shares early, so that you can wait the period that it takes to make it a tax-free capital gain. That's why we call it reverse vesting.
Yeah, and this is really a case that I would like to discuss with you, exactly for here, the spin-off. So here we have Paul, Susan, and Mary again, and this is exactly a case which addresses these issues. And they want to do a startup and they incorporate, right? The problem is that they don't have that much money yet. So what they do is they say only Paul should get an employment agreement with the startup yet. Susan and Mary would still employed with the ETH or have some other work still. Okay, so they signed then a shareholders agreement, and the shareholders agreement say they had a reverse vesting in place, and it says upon termination of their share of the employment agreement within the next 2 years, you have to give back your shares. Okay, upon termination of the employment agreement. Susan actually, she never joined. She went to the bank, hence the $sign, and worked there. Mary, she joined, but the startup, but then she got sick. And now the question is a bit, what can Paul do with the shares regarding Susan, and what's happening with the shares regarding Mary because she got sick? Do you have any idea here? So the problem we have here, and this is really the bottom line, be careful how you phrase the wording in your shareholders agreement, because the problem we have, it says upon termination of the employment agreement. Susan never joined, so there was no termination of an employment agreement possible, right? So she was entitled to keep her shares, although she just never did anything for the startup. So really poorly drafted call option. Good bad leaver provision. And Mary, well, okay, she joined, but then she was just sick for half a year and didn't do anything. Or maybe she was sick for 2 years and couldn't contribute. And for the two of them, it would have been good for Paul if he had good, clause in the shareholders agreement, which would have enabled him to buy back the shares. And whether it would be at good lever or bad lever, that's another matter, because bad lever would be then maybe a nominal value and good lever at the fair market value, which would yet have to be determined. But this is really, which shows you that you have to be very careful when you draft a shareholders agreement. So here the do is, if you are 3 founders, put reverse vesting in place to just, really save each other and as a measure of a safety measure. If not all founders join initially, extend reverse vesting to not joining in due time as triggering event, so that you have to maybe join until 4 months or something like that. Or and just think of all kinds of reasons for termination. Also, maybe if someone is sick, then maybe, for instance, the vesting schedule should be prolonged, or if you don't come back within a certain time, maybe you should be able to buy back the shares, as I mentioned before. And consider the prolongation of vesting period in cases of sickness, as I mentioned before. So don't just, and this is really what we see sometimes, people find templates everywhere, right, in the internet of shareholders agreement. You can use them, but from our experience, people use them, they sign them, they don't actually even know what's in there. And if they find out later, they're surprised about the rule. They don't know how to apply it. And then they have some provision which does not really match with what they should need. So rather ask us, and we can do at least a sanity check and give you at least some oral input, you know? It's worth it. Because it would be sad if you just have someone sitting on half of the shares without doing anything. I mean, yeah. And in this situation, it was for some reason still alive. But yeah, Paul could reach out to them and they could find an agreement. So that was okay ultimately because these were reasonable people. But still, not everyone is like that. So I think time is up. I just really want to touch upon 1 or 2 points. Employee participation. Those who have already incorporated, have you ever considered issuing an employee incentive plan or participate employees? Yeah? Okay. Do you have a plan in place? Or?
Not yet.
Okay, but it's something you're considering.
Yes.
Okay, and you? Not yet. Same. Okay, interesting. I mean, we cannot possibly discuss all the features of an employee incentive plan, but this slide, which you will also receive, just gives you an overview of the possible structuring options you have. So first of all, you can just directly gift shares. You can either do it your own shares, which for tax reasons we don't recommend, but maybe you need desperately some money, you want to see some cash, maybe then you want to transfer some shares. It's okay. Or you do a capital increase and then you issue the shares by the company. And then you have to put the reverse vesting in place, right, so that you can get them back. Or you do a classic employee incentive plan. You have, maybe you've heard of it, you first issue options. The options you grant are tax-free because you issue them normally for free. And then after, they have to stay and work for them to get shares at the company. Typically, you have a 1-year cliff, right? That when you leave within 1 year, you don't get anything. And then you have a vesting schedule, let's say quarterly vesting over 4 years, or monthly or yearly vesting. That really depends on how you structure it. But that's very common. And then options, they entitle to real shares, right? But you only get them later, and here you get them up front. It's just reverse, the other way around. And then also what we have is the virtual shares, virtual options. That's a phantom stock option plan. I'm not sure whether you've heard of that, but you don't exactly, you don't get real shares. You don't sit on the actual cap table. Rather, you're just being treated like you own shares. So you benefit from dividend distributions, which are not that common with startups, at the beginning at least. And in case of an exit, you would basically have, one virtual option would equal 1 share, so you would get the same cash out. And it qualifies as a bonus. So the main difference between real shares and virtual shares is that you don't have a voting right. You don't really sit on the cap table. You don't have a say. It doesn't dilute the other investors' say for if the employees are on board. These are the main difference. For tax purposes, sometimes you can structure it a bit more favorably if you issue real shares, because then you can apply certain formulas which you then have to have approved by the local tax authorities. And if you hold them, for instance, longer than 5 years, you get a fully tax-free capital gain at a later exit. That's not possible with virtual shares, because virtual shares are always fully taxable once you have them as income tax. But you only tax them typically at an exit, because that's when you typically exercise them. But that's all subject to structuring. Does anyone have any questions with that? Okay. So, yeah, let's quickly move to a situation. This is actually some clients of mine. They have that situation. They both incorporated 50-50. And then they found they were growing quite big, quite quickly, and then they had like 10 employees, and they all wanted to give them shares. And now we have to think of the different structuring options, right? And I told them if they want to do something maybe quickly and easier to implement and something cheap, then maybe a virtual share plan. But maybe they don't feel the same commitment if they only have virtual shares as an employee, right? So this is something you have to take into consideration. Yeah, and I think this is it from our end, because we're already past time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we stick around for if you do have any questions for a while.
Yeah, sure.